Okay, there's usually a little bit of a short delay, so I'll just give it a couple seconds. But everybody has such beautiful backgrounds today. We've all got our bookshelves, our books, all sorts of things. Glad to see it. Okay, well, we already have people here waiting to watch, so I guess we'll go ahead and get started. And I will say hello. Welcome to Boobies and Noobies. This is our monthly Tit Talk panel here on YouTube. Each month, we bring together a group of panelists to discuss a topic in and around romance. My name is Kelly Reynolds. I host Boobies and Noobies. I'm joined by all of these fantastic guests today. I don't know where I show up on your screen, but they're over here on my side. And I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves before we get talking about monster fuckery, because I know when I chose this topic, I did so with the intention that we could stock those TBR lists heading into the month of October when so many of us binge our paranormal and monster romances, even though we know that they are for all year round reading. So I'm going to turn it over to them, starting with Kate.
Okay. You think I put my face on the internet for so many people. You think I'd be less nervous, but I'm like shaking for some reason. And this is my expert topic. I'm Kate. I am the host of Romantically Inclined Reviews. I have a website and Instagrams and a podcast, and I just talk a lot about all the books I love. And I've been doing that for and I do memes. You probably know me for that. I do memes.
I was going to say, don't leave out the biggest part that I feel like so many people know you by. So even if they don't know Kate, they know romantic inclined memes.
Yes, you've probably seen my memes somewhere at some point. But yeah, that's all. That's me.
Perfect. I love it. Okay, over to Carmen.
So I feel like I'm like the least exciting out of the rest of you with all the things, but I understand.
Stop it.
I know. I am an avid reader since like 94. And so I have an Instagram account called Carmen Reads Romance, and I specifically talk a lot about monsters and their special bits. That's the most important. That's what I love doing. So
I love that you're so specific with since 94. Like, is that like a mile marker year?
That was when I was 12. That's when my mom brought home a book, and I thought it was a historical novel, and it turned out to have a lot of sex in it. I was hooked.
Perfect. That's how a lot of us get hooked. So, Carlotta, how about you?
Hi, I'm Carlotta Hughes. I am an author, and I write orc romance. I have a lot of fun with that, and I write corny, thorny, horny stories.
Yes, that's your tagline that you have on your website, which I was like, well, obviously she's part of this panel. That's perfect. And of course, Miss Jillian.
Hi, I'm Jillian. I am a monster and paranormal romance author. My debut Titan, a Gargoyle Daddy Dom romance, came out in June, and I'm just excited to be here and talk about the horny and thorny as well as the interesting bits.
And first of all, I can't believe it's been several months since Titan came out. I feel like it was just yesterday, but also you have an audiobook in the works as well for Titan.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it, especially because I just got the message of like asking what I'm looking for, which is like, I don't know, a dream position to be in where I get to just listen to a lot of hot voices and be like, yeah, that's
thorny, horny enough. Like, is he horny and thorny enough?
I'm getting horny, but I'm not getting horny. We need more horny. Yeah.
Yikes. Well, that sounds like a lot of fun. Well, we are all here to discuss monster romance and why we love it, why it's made such a big impact on the romance community, especially I feel like in the last year or so, and what we hope for the future of monster romance. So I guess the first question I would want to ask everybody is just to simplify it for anybody that's maybe less familiar with this subgenre. What do we define as a monster romance? And I'll turn that over to anybody who wants to take it.
Well, for me, because I've been reading paranormal and like urban fantasy since like the 90s. And the biggest thing is that these guys don't shift into human when they're having sex. So they might shift into human sometimes. Like there's some really good monsters that can be human, but to make it into that monster one is they have that monster body that takes it all the way to the bedroom. So that's the big thing for me.
I would agree with that because there are like, I've also started with reading paranormal urban fantasy where essentially they're human, you know, and they just have some special powers. And even though like technically vampires are monsters if you're going by like a classic like horror movie tropes, but I don't think we consider them monsters in the monster romance sense because they're not taking on like some sort of different form, especially in the bedroom. I mean, I guess, you know, they could be bats or whatever, but they're not doing anything in bat form. So I think that's the difference between it, right? Between monster and just paranormal is like, are they in this sort of other form for the majority of the story and especially during the intimate scenes?
Yeah, I think that's interesting because I was thinking about this myself and just sort of when I make monster romance recommendations to readers. In fact, I'm doing a book club with a Facebook group and the theme this month is monsters. And I felt really weird about suggesting like a werewolf or a vampire because of how anthropomorphized they are as opposed to you know, other creatures like an orc, a gargoyle, where they definitely take on less humanistic like qualities.
I think a lot of the monsters that are included in this tend to come a lot from mythology. So for me, as long as it's sourced somewhere from a mythology standpoint and is not someone that is completely human, like you guys were telling me, yeah. Sorry, I'm awkward. That made no sense.
No, it makes sense. I also think you think about how many come from like urban legends too, like Mothman, right? Like a lot of cryptids.
I would say that they're also, if we're talking about vampires and werewolves, we can see the change too from like the 90s and the 2000s when it was like really popular for like when we had Buffy the Vampire out and what those vampires look like. And they might have morphed into a more like scarier face when they were doing it. But there's been some ones that I've recently read where they're taking more of that monster perspective where they actually have a very monstrous body when they're in like their hunting mode. And so they're like, you're taking some of those like vampire ones and moving them into the monster realm because of that. But you also have ones like Lillian Lark's, like I feel like I almost like over recommend her book. Like I love it, but like the Stalked by the Kraken, he is this like ancient Kraken that you can't really have him walking down the street as like, how's he going to walk? And he's supposed to be in the ocean. So he's almost completely a human but it still classifies as monster because there's so many other characters that are monster. And then when they get into the bedroom, the tentacles come out. And so it's like this nice little, like, if you could do vampires and werewolves, you can probably do these tentacles. So there's some of those like branching or bridging ones.
So when I call those starters.
Yes.
I always recommend Stalked by the Kraken as like a starter monster.
Part of your starter kit. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like all of us have one. We all have like the romance starter kit. In fact, I'm going to be doing a live show in Los Angeles next month. And one of the things that I'm planning to kind of like give away to people to come see it is my starter kit recommendations. Like, oh, are you just getting started with your romance recs? Great. Here's a historical. Here's a contemporary. Here's a monster. So I feel like the gateways that we want to introduce everybody to the genre and the subgenres with. Well, I did want to ask, I know we talked about a little bit how it steers away from paranormal, but there's still a little bit of an overlap. And I feel like the other subgenre that I see often conflated with monsters that I'd love to get your opinion on is aliens. Is there overlap or are they separate entities?
There's plenty of overlap.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I heard tentacles and my ears were just like,
alien. I mean, my orcs are they are spicy Scottish space orcs, so they actually live on a completely different planet. they portal into Earth. So I mean, there's plenty of opportunity for overlap between all of the different monsters that we know and the ones that we can make up.
Mm-hmm.
I would almost consider like aliens, like you could like see monsters as like this overarching like descriptor, and then having like aliens be part of that, as well as then sort of more classic aliens. Because I assume if someone's asking for a monster rec, like recommending Ice Planet Barbarians isn't out of like the possibility to me. I might be like, what about alien type? You know what I mean? Like, because they function like pretty much the same, or they can function very similarly. So you know, it gives the same vibes.
So is it then basically anything that is like alternative human? Because that's kind of where we're at. It's like alternative human. If it includes aliens, it includes cryptids, it includes mythology and everything else for monsters. It's just different flavors, like ice cream.
I have like a little meter in my head of like the ones that you would do. And so like you have your monster light, where it's like you can have the aliens that look like humans and the vampires and the werewolves who shift into humans, that start kind of like as your entry point. And then they progressively get more, like you can get your orcs, which really look like humans a lot of the times, but they're just different colors, and they might have bigger appendages and lots of fluids, right? It's not that scary. Like you're not getting into the horns. Oh, they might have some like sharper teeth, but you can kind of like, if you can do human, you can probably do this, right? And then you get into like those half humans where they have like their top half, or like, you know, like you have the Minotaur he's got kind of like the abs, and he has human hands and stuff. And the abs. Still,
mention the abs.
Yeah,
he's still got the V.
I feel like that's one of those, like when we get into like the full on monster fuckery that we were talking about, is when they lose the abs. So like I have my like full, like he does not look like a human at all. And so I remember reading like Joanna Lindsay's, which was popular last year on Instagram, the Warriors Woman. And like that's a sci-fi alien one, but they all look human. And like he's of a barbarian race. And so like he's in, like you have these aliens, but they still look human, and they're very much like the same of the sci-fi ones where we talk about Jane Ann Krentz, with her bringing in sci-fi into the romance genre, versus going into like the Ice Planet Barbarians, where we now have, they're blue, they have horns, they have tails, and they have extra special stuff on their appendages.
And their bits. Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. Aaron in the chat said aliens fall under the monster umbrella. And I'm picturing it as if it's like one of those infographics that's like, would you like to read a monster romance? Yes. Okay, move forward. Would you like to read a monster romance in which the monster is more or less human-ish? Take a right turn. Yep. Would you like to read anything else, like no holds barred? Take a left, because over here we've got a whole other selection of romance with monsters for you to choose from.
Yeah. That's exactly how I visualize it when I talk to people.
Yes, us visual learners, we have to stick together. So, okay, well, now that we have kind of like, I guess, at least a basic understanding of our version of monster romance and where aliens fall in there, where the more classic paranormal characters, vampires, werewolves fall in there. Let's talk a little bit about each of our history with monster romance, because I don't feel like this is something that has really, aside from paranormal, I feel like it hasn't been around as long as a lot of the other genres or subgenres. So in my mind, I'm picturing it as like paranormal was sort of the gateway into then, well, what else can we do? And we started to see some alien romance, a few years ago. And then from there, it became, okay, well, what else can we do? So I'd love to know just sort of where everybody started reading monster romance, and what was the reason? I mean, what really brought you into reading it? What interested you about it?
For me, and I'm sure this is the answer for a lot of people, but it was COVID. I'm sitting at home, bored out of my mind, binge reading romance novels like I've been doing for the last 15 years. And someone recommended Ice Planet Barbarians. And I just decided, okay, like I'll read it. I read 9 in like 2 days. And then when I got Kindle Unlimited and I was breastfeeding at the time. So I was up like, 4 hours a night. And I had my phone and I was like, I'll just get Kindle Unlimited. And then I started reading all the Ice Planet. And then Eliza MacArthur did a whole breakdown of what buckets of man's, I don't know, what are we allowed to say on YouTube? Fluid, how much that would actually be. She did like a whole thing about like breaking it down, like trying to figure out exactly how much they're actually finishing with. And I was like, I got to read the Orc series by Finley
Bless
Fenn.
her.
And so, yeah. So I think that was my first monster, like not sci-fi romance. And then it was just downhill. I read all of them and then uphill.
Or uphill. Yeah, I was about to say, don't downplay it.
Upward spiral into just a lot of monster. So it hasn't been that long for me. I don't know how long it's been for some of the other wonderful individuals here, but only about 1.5 years.
My craziness into spiral was obviously Finley Fenn was the first one I read as well back last fall when I picked up, or maybe end of summer, I got Kindle Unlimited last year. So it's been about 1 year. And that's when I dove into the Kindle Unlimited world of monsters. Previously, I had read some different alien ones, but they very much, aside from Ice Planet Barbarian, previous to that, they were very much like the old Joanna Lindsay, where they call themselves aliens and maybe their eyes look a little bit different, or maybe they were just a little too polished, but they still very much represented humans. I read a lot of urban fantasy all the way back to my teen years in the 90s. And for the most part, most of those authors stayed very much in like you're with a human man who might have been cursed as like a monster or demons. Sherilyn Kenyon's one of my favorite authors. Mm-hmm. So she has a lot of demons in her series, and they can be very monstrous, but they look like humans during relationship time. But I also stumbled into some like horror. So I like Laurel K. Hamilton was one. And back then, like I read that at early 2000s, her, so she has Anita Blake Vampire Hunter, which has like all the different furries and stuff that make up her polyamorous bedroom. But she wrote another series that I prefer. It's the Mary Gentry one, which is her like Fae series. And they all are like these perfect, like some of them are green, like there's one guy who's green, and like so the different Fae ones, they all very much look like tall, gorgeous men, except for the one who's like he's the king of nightmares. Yes, I love him so much. And that was my introduction to tentacles. Yeah, me too. That was a bedroom. Like, oh. Yeah, that was so. But then there just wasn't the same variety. Like I think 100% COVID was the thing that helped me, but like ebooks is a big thing too, because when you went into a used books or into a bookstore and you go to the romance section, you're only seeing what like the gatekeepers of like those bookstores would like put on the shelves back then, like we're so old. But it's only been the last like 5-10 years that like this year at Christmas, I went to the bookstore and they had a TikTok recommendation shelf and it had Ice Planet Barbarian there. So my dad had asked me to buy a book for my mom for Christmas from him, and so that's what she got from him. He has no idea what it was.
Thoughtful. What a fantastic gift.
But what, you would never have seen that before. So I think it's like all this combination of like us reading it on KU saying, hey, this is really great because we were all bored, and then the audience saying they want more so that there's more authors. Because like Jillian, when you wrote I remember last year going, why are there not more gargoyles? Everybody in their like dog says that they love Goliath when we talk about like what was their introduction. If it isn't the beast, it's Goliath. And there just really wasn't any, but now that so many people are wanting it, so yeah, I agree. That was my short answer. Is Kate's too. That COVID. That was my long answer though, because there's Sholto who had his tentacles coming out of his stomach.
I guess mine started actually when I was around 12. Because I went to the local library and I went to the section where you can purchase some of the books that they were getting rid of. And I came across Piers Anthony. I got Ogre, and Centaur Isle. And while they're mainly fantasy, there's a lot of romance in it, and Piers Anthony's kind of problematic. But beyond that, it was my first introduction because you got things like harpies and a human, or a gnome and like an ogre, and it going from the Boxcar Children to that was a big jump. And then in high school, it was like Carmen said, it was Laurel K. Hamilton, Sherilyn Kenyon, and then whatchamacallit? Sorry, I have my books up there, so that's why I'm looking. Barb and J.C. Hendy. So they did like a Dampier series. So and there's monsters in that as well. So there was that. And then recently I got Ice Planet Barbarians, got me back on back in the game, and it's because of my divorce. So because fictional man can't hurt you.
No.
Yep. Especially when they're monsters.
Absolutely.
My path is pretty similar to Carmen, except not COVID. I just have always read paranormal romance, Laurel K. Hamilton, Kresley Cole. That's the type of TV shows, big Buffy and Angel and Charmed and all that. And so to me, I started reading like Ice Planet Barbarians before COVID, like 2018 or 19 or something like that. And to me, it's just the natural continuation of paranormal and just where the paranormal genre is going. And it's like, early 2000s, it was vampires, werewolves, because that was very popular. For what reason? Who knows? And then this is just like morphing and shifting to the time that we're in. And I think I'm sure we'll get into this, but I do think like for the bigger problems we have in the world, we need bigger monsters. We need like something even more intense than just a vampire. Though I love vampires. So, I say as my next novella coming out has a vampire, but I sort of just think it's the continuation of paranormal and just where it's going. And I think that's just how my reading evolved. I was like, oh, is this where we're going? Cool. That makes sense to me. Give me more. But yeah.
I'm glad you brought up the early 2000s because I was a high schooler in the early 2000s. And so naturally, I cut my teeth on Twilight and True Blood. And I think from there, it was sort of a natural progression to we romanticized monsters that were more human-like at that time. So vampires, werewolves, demons, even ghosts to some extent. And so I feel like when you're reading about that and watching so many movies with love stories featuring characters like that at very formative years in your life, it becomes part of the love stories that you that I don't want to say that you expect to read, but that you're definitely open to reading about. And so because of that, like as time went on and I started diving more into actually reading romance, I would, come across one with vampires and think, oh, well, I have to read this, like, obviously. And from there, I think for me, some of the first ones I read that I wouldn't necessarily consider monster, but would fall under the paranormal umbrella. I binged through Lauren Donner's New Species series, and she has an Alien series. And it's interesting to see even like a specific author progress through this wide range, because I've seen her write from shifter species to aliens to now these like gargoyle creatures that I'm like, this is so interesting just in your own personal writing story that you've opened up the kinds of characters that you're willing to write. So for me, like a lot of you, I think the pandemic definitely was a time to like explore really anything that brought us out of the realm of reality. And you can't go much farther than monsters. I feel like monsters are about as fantastical as it gets. And that's something that I know I found comfort in. And I think I especially turned to monsters around September or October of I guess it would have been 2020, where there was going to be a anthology of monster romance published, and we saw it kind of implode on book Twitter because that's what we love to watch. And suddenly you had all of these authors who had written these stories that didn't have a place to share them. And so a lot of people just started advocating for them to self-publish and put their work out there. And I knew that I wanted to support them as best I could. So I started reading them. And it was a lot of monsters that I had never read before. And then in this past year, I think just the past few months, it's been more of an escape from human men that's really drawn me to reading them. Because, and this is something I did want to ask about as well, is in my experience, the monsters I'm reading about are usually male monsters. And so I'm curious, in your experience of reading and writing monster romance, what is it that you think attracts us specifically to reading and writing about male monsters as opposed to female monsters, or even just non-gender specific monsters?
I think about this a lot, actually. And I did a TikTok post where I talked about one of the things that I think people find appealing in monsters. Like, one, I think the reason that we see more male monsters and like female, the heroine is a human, is just because the majority of books being represented are usually like cishet ones, and usually there's some element of allowing the reader to self-insert as like the human a little bit, even if it's not directly, it's just a little bit there. So I think that's part of why it happens so much, is just what is being put out there, like relationship wise, is just going to kind of be geared towards that. But I also think that when growing up, I think a lot of women, again, I'm talking from a very like cishet perspective on this, so just, you know, be aware that I'm not covered at all, but that we're taught to view men as monsters. We're taught to sort of be afraid of them, of that they may hurt us, that we are meant to be attracted to them and pleasing to them, but also be careful because they might hurt you. And I almost think that with monster romances, it is putting it out there to an extreme, and it's usually putting all the scary bits out to the extreme very, very early on. And then we get to actually see, no, he's actually really nice and he's much better. And he's, you know what I mean? Like, it's all, you know, we get sort of the scarier part up front. And then we get like the gentler, kinder, actually he uses all those scary bits to protect you, to, I don't know, help you, or, you know, be a spider who weaves you a dress with his scary skills. And I think there's something really appealing about that, because it kind of, at least for me, it taps into this sort of ingrained thing from being very, very young, of where you're actually supposed to be afraid of men while also being attracted to them. And it just puts it out there to an extreme level.
To expand upon that, a lot of times, like you were saying, the monstrosity is up front. Mm-hmm. So everything that makes this character monstrous is immediate. And so you see that already. And then you get to learn about the character themselves. While a lot of times, at least from a lot of my experience, usually there's a nice front for human men, and then the monstrosity happens later. Mm-hmm. And so, well, at least with monster romance or alien romance, in a cishet capacity, you really see character growth a lot more with the male characters, the male leads, because you see them go from having all this monstrous capabilities, and then you see more of their personality, but then they tend to grow as well, which a lot of times I feel like in real life we don't see as much, as at least as much as we would wish.
It's sort of the difference between I know I'm talking in terms of movies, but it's sort of the difference between like Beauty and the Beast versus like Promising Young Woman, where you have the monster up front, but we learn to love the monster and what's within the monster that really counts, versus the men who are presenting as the nice guys and, oh, he's such a great guy, but then underneath there's something more monstrous just waiting to come out. So yeah, I definitely see where both of you are coming from on there. But Kate and Carmen, if you want to expand or add to that, feel free.
There's well, for me, I think there's the wonderful world about romance and any kind of subgenres. We have like lots of tropes, and there's a lot of different things that can pull people in from like different favorite tropes that you can like become attracted to with romance. Like something like Finlay Fenn, to me, I did a whole post on how I feel that hers are very, and when I talk to friends who like historical, like specifically old school bodice rippers, moving into like that orc world where you're seeing that kind of similar stereotypes, and that like growing up on bodice rippers, like what Jillian said, that was the same reason, right? Like, because we got to control the narrative, and we were taught our whole lives that men are scary. But in the end, the woman always gets that agency and autonomy, and she like wins. Like she gets a guy who, so you're looking for that happy ending. You just accept the kind of terrible stuff. So you have some romances that are doing that, and you get it all up front. We also have like the Beauty and the Beast ones where we were attracted to that as a child, and we were like, why did he have to change? He really didn't look that great afterwards anyways. But those ones are kind of along the lines of the ones who liked in historicals, like the scarred hero, like the one who like a wounded soldier, he like had like everybody who loves the Lord of Scoundrels and like those type of ones where we're getting to see the beauty within and understanding that. But on top of it, with monsters and aliens, one of the things that I really like and what I'm more attracted to now, even though I started in the historical, like those used to be my comfort reads, I find when I just want to escape after reading a bunch of books, more than likely it's going to be a monster book I'm picking up, because we get to also remove the gender role expectations. So even if we're reading like a heterosexual relationship, and the male monster is with a female that's human, we get to take them outside of our cultural norms, and he's more willing to like love her, like the beautiful spider who does that. Like he was raised in a matriarchal society, and so for him, he doesn't understand the same kind of stuff that we have here on Earth. And so you get to go, like, as an author and readers, we can accept the fact that he would be more understanding, and I find that part is appealing too, versus just reading the mafia romances and some of the other dark romances where we're getting a guy who is stuck in the roles that we have in society, who rebels against them. Like those can be appealing, and I have my favorite authors for those as well. But with Monster, they never had to follow those rules to begin with. So they either are teaching the woman that she's silly for thinking that that's what she should expect, or he's willing to adapt. And I think that's what appeals to me.
Yeah, good point.
So I've been muting myself because my son is eating. He's a very loud eater in the living room. I mean, I agree with everything everyone has been saying. Like, I'm not really even sure how I can continue to expand on the amazing points that were just made. Kind of a bonus of like going last in the circulation there. I have read actually quite a few romances where the heroine is also. I have not read one where the heroine is the only monster, but I have read a number where they are both monsters. So I think our time is coming, but I do think it has, I believe it was Jillian who mentioned this, that it just has a lot to do with like romance readers are predominantly female or identify as female, and they just want to be able to self-insert. I personally do not self-insert myself into romance novels. I like to view it as a third party. Like
that's me too. That has always been me. And people always think that's weird when I'm like, no, I look at it from like more of a voyeuristic point of view as opposed to self-insert.
Yeah, I do not want to be the heroine. I just want to be a fly on the wall watching other people do it. Basically.
My mark for like a romance that I love is that, do I want to fuck him and do I want to be friends with her? Like that's usually how I look at it, but I know everybody's different.
I like that. That's fun. But yeah, so I think that I would like to see more where they're both monsters, or even some where she is, but I think it kind of goes into some interesting territory where you're like, okay, well now, like she can't be too monstrous. like, I don't know if I want to read a heroine who has tentacles from the waist down, because it gets interesting with
Ursula?
like how I would just picture Ursula the entire time, I think, which would well, I don't know, I've seen some really great cosplay of Ursula, but yeah, so I think it's I saw Erin's point about how manga and anime is predominantly the female's monster because it's more for the male gaze, and I grew up reading a lot of manga and watching a lot of anime, and so I think that that is a very true point. And so it's kind of fun to like switch between the two, because you just go and you're like, oh, well, she's the one with the tentacles, okay, and flip it back and forth. But when I'm reading, I'm open to it all. I would love to see some more female monsters. I did. I'm sure you guys know the author. It's not strictly romance, more fantasy, but it's I've never how to say this. Woman loving woman. Like, it's not weird when I say it out loud, but when I write it, it looks good.
WLW, yeah.
WLW.
And one is not a fairy.
Something in lattes, right?
Yeah.
Is that the one you're saying?
Yeah, Legends and Lattes.
Legends and Lattes.
Yeah. So I started reading that, and it's really great. Again, it's primarily a fantasy, not primarily a romance, but I love seeing a female orc and getting to see that dynamic, because you do have a lot of gay monster romance. But not
which
so
we
much.
will I do want to get to in a minute, but I think Carlotta had something that she wanted to add.
Well, there's I'm actually going to be coming out with a WLW where the one of the leads is she's an orc.
Yay! All right.
So, and it's to expand upon that, what you said, that our time is coming. It really opens up the opportunity for us to deconstruct some of our own preconceived notions of femininity and everything else. And I think that that's a really awesome opportunity that we have as a community.
Just to expand for the female ones, like I did a post a while ago because I was like, there should be like female ones, and there was like the sapphic ones, there's some polyamorous, and there was some cishet ones where the guy is the human. And usually I found it took me a while to dig to find quite a few of the stories, and mostly they happen in like authors will put them out as a series, and like somebody's like one of their sisters was such a good side character, like that she demands her own story. And so she gets put in. There is one that just came out called Serenity. I'm just looking to make sure, like Ren Morris just put a book out, and it is on, like, just came out in September. And she's Scylla, who's the one, if you guys read like Cersei from Madeline.
Yeah, Scylla, yeah.
So she's the sea monster who has like all the tentacles, and he's a human. Well, he presents human on the cover. I'm not sure.
On my TBR.
I'm ready. I'm finishing my Lily Main is just like, because I didn't get on that ARC team. So that is what I'm reading right now. But that's one of my next ones for a monster one. And there's one, Amanda, is it Milo, who's does a lot of sci-fi ones. And she's a very funny monster alien type of ones, and she has no problem putting female center but it is a different one. Like when we're looking as female, especially women who are like bi or heterosexual who are inserting themselves into the story, and we're looking at men for the monsters, it's that gender role thing. It's either the Beauty and the Beast, like those type of tropes that we're looking for, but where we're putting the female as the monster and the man is the human, where I feel like it's more like the same ones where you have like the plain ugly duckling female who feels ostracized and is not being loved, and you're inserting yourself as like, here's a guy who would love her. Or you're looking at it from, if it's in a series where she was a I don't know, what are we allowed to say on badass? She's the one who kicked butt in a series, and she demands her story. So we want to see her, like, we've seen her as a monster, and we've kind of like adjusted to the idea that there's a female character who's a monster, and we're like, give me her story too. But like when there's standalones, a lot of times I'm seeing, like when I do the research to find the novels, it's the ones that are attractive we're inserting ourselves as this female who feels not accepted because we are a monster, and that the humans, or the gorgeous man that she was raised, which again, when you read monsters, like that's what I like, that Radiance is a good one. And even I Married a Lizard Man, where both cultures, they are hot, but they think each other are like absolutely hideous. So it's not like
That's funny.
he was brought up as looking at all these humans thinking, you won't love me because I'm a hideous monster. He's like, no, I'm like one of the sexiest men alive in my world. You're ugly. So that's an interesting.
That reminds me, I saw a tweet the other day that was like, what if, maybe it was on Instagram, I forget, but it was, what if we're invisible to ghosts and just like they're invisible to us, and then they're just walking around wondering like who made that plate of pancakes? Like, I thought it was the funniest thing to imagine, where I was like, oh my God, it's true. Like, we just think about how we perceive ghosts. What if ghosts think of us as their ghosts? Like, Inception. But no, I did want to speak a moment on queer romance within monster romance, because I feel like it's interesting, like, as we look at monster romance expanding, saying that it began as stemming from paranormal into aliens and monsters, and we're just getting a little more free each time with what we're willing to both read and write, what we're willing to accept our characters to be. I feel like we have that exact same conversation almost when it comes to talking about LGBTQ romance, and the fact that, oh, well, we're so used to enforcing like a male-female dynamic in romance. Okay, but now we can have male-female dynamics and one of them's bisexual. However, they still end up with somebody, presenting of the opposite gender. Okay, now we're willing to include more sapphic and male-male romance. Okay, now we're willing to bring in more trans and non-binary characters. So it is very interesting to me to see how similar those two ideas are, in that we're only willing to take on so much at certain times, but like it's slowly progressing. And I feel like the good thing about paranormal and fantasy and monster is that it's another world a lot of the times. Like, you're creating characters who live outside of our structure of, at least American ideas of what politics look like, what gender identity looks like, what relationship and gender roles look like, that it feels like we should be able to push the envelope a bit more sooner with something like monster romance. And I think that's why from the get-go we're also seeing a lot more queer romance, queer relationships within monster romance, which I really love.
I think about sort of what you were talking about earlier with these monsters. However, like, my monsters are in a human world, just sort of more hidden in the shadows kind of thing. Or when people create a whole new world, fantasy world where they live, when you start to like really think about these creatures who live for like thousands of years, enforcing like strict gender or sexuality roles starts feeling really silly.
Yeah.
And it does for me, where like so I have like MMF coming, I have FF coming, and in more ways than one. And
hey, had to get one in.
Yeah, wouldn't be a romance panel without it. And so it feels really silly to just be like, so these gargoyles are going to live like thousands of years, and they're never ever going to like experiment. They're never going to like, they're going to like restrict themselves based on a society that's constantly changing around them. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. So to me, it opens it up pretty easily. Once you start like putting any amount of thought into it, you're just like, well, of course we're going to have a variety of relationships, because it's the only thing that makes sense for these creatures who live forever. They're not going to all end up the same.
You've been around for thousands of years, and you're telling me you've stayed with one person in this like very, like heteronormative relationship? No, I'm not going to believe it. Yeah. It's just
Well, you see that even like that was, I think, one of the appealing things is fantasy and like paranormal sci-fi has been appealing to the queer community for a long time. Because even if you go back to like Anne Rice, like Lestat and all the vampires have been coded even on screen, even if it wasn't like right there. Like in the books, I think it's a little bit more. I've only read a few of the books. I didn't but like that's been there for years and like been very popular of getting into that same idea. And like if you're going to read a book about, if you like demons and you're reading ones about like a lust demon, you're telling me his entire career, his whole thing is about having sex, but he's only going to have sex with heterosexual women? Like, no, he's a lust demon. So yeah, I think you have, but also with the monsters, we can do the exploring of like the genderqueer side of things because they don't have to have, I read a lot of non-binary, like alien and monster ones where they have the ability to reproduce either as like they have both sides of the genitalia and they get to make that choice. We get to explore into like the male pregnancy ones, both, which gets interesting for like the storylines of the ones where like the human is the host versus like the non-binary monsters have the ability to carry the children or spawn or whatever we're going to call them, like humans and aliens mostly. So I think that opens up so much because we're no longer structured in this like little box of what is right in today's society. So, and then as you like it and you start exploring some of the stories, like a lot of us who are saying that we're picking up and reading a lot more because of Kindle Unlimited, you start going and looking on Goodreads and some of the lists of people who were more readers of these more niche markets before that had gatekeepers that were keeping the books. Like you didn't really know about them as much. You start finding, like I have, being in Canada, I have Kobo Plus, which all of you don't have access to, but it's like the subscription, just like Kindle Unlimited. And a lot of other authors put their backlists on there. And I found like authors that are like really amazing. So, and you find out they've been written like in 2002 or something.
Yeah, it is amazing how I do think a lot of books that are coming out now, even Titan, for example, like I wonder what the response to something like Titan would have been like 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. And versus like something like that coming out now and people are gaga for it. Like people want that. And it's, but I used to work in movies and it's the same thing. It's very specific where it's sometimes you can't even plan. Like when you're filming something or writing a book a year in advance of when it's actually going to come out, you can't plan for what the social and political climate is going to be at that time. Like it's somehow just kind of coincides with it. And it's coinciding nicely with monsters right now. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also interesting how monster romance has led to like kink being more acceptable. Yeah. In a sense, it's like people who wouldn't read daddy kink in a human pick up Titan and they're like, yes, like, it's interesting. They're much more willing to allow things, to open their minds to things, I should say, in monster romance that they would turn their nose up at, metaphorically. I mean, I don't think they're actually turning, but in a human romance. There's and plus, so I read the book Strange Love by Anna Guire, and he doesn't even have a member. A velvet wrapped steel member. And that was really interesting to me. That was like my first time reading a book where like the character didn't even have the bits that you would need for reproducing with a human in that sense. And so I think you just like stick your fingers in his like neck folds and it like gets them off.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And they have to find ways that work around that because now, like you have a situation in which they can't even breed in a human sense, which was really fun. It's a very interesting, it's almost like Hunger Games-esque battle royale book. Sure. And I loved that. And so that opened me up to like this whole other world. Then you have like Soul Eater by Lily Mayne, where the main character is intersex. and has both male and female genitalia, and there aren't really, he's referred to as a man, as a he in the book, but his people, they don't really have gender, actually. They just have sex with each other, and one of them carries babies. Like, it doesn't matter who. I think they can just decide who wants to carry the baby. So I just love that it's like opening up to all these different possibilities in terms of the kinks and like we talked about, like non-binary characters and characters where worlds where gender is not even a thing, and how the authors navigate that in new and unique ways. So I love
that's
that.
really interesting. And I like that you brought that up, especially because I know Kate and I had mentioned that, when we're reading, at least we kind of read from the outside. We don't insert ourselves. And I think there's something about the more fantastical a book is, the safer it feels for certain readers to explore ideas and themes that maybe they feel less comfortable discussing in real life. But when you can place it in a controlled environment and say, well, they're not human. This isn't me. This isn't the world that I live in. This is a completely different place. So now I can have this conversation and I can focus in and try and understand what's going on here. And I think that's both a good thing and a bad thing. I think there are people who will maybe use that to like a disadvantage as well, to try to make light of certain situations and say, oh, but it's fiction, it's fantasy, it doesn't matter. However, I do think having discussions about things that are happening in our everyday life, but placing them in a fantastical way, is a great tool, is a great device for authors to use and for readers to recognize if they want to do so. Because you can't make people read a certain way, but you can hope.
It's also easier to write, like, to me, when I was working, so before Titan and the Gargoyle direction that I went in, which was, by the way, because of that anthology that fell apart, like that was
okay.
Yeah. So I was working on a contemporary romance, and in my head, the one thing that I would come back to, and what was so tricky about it, was I kept being like, okay, back to reality. What would someone actually say? What would someone actually do? And it's you have, like, in my mind, I was like, I have to stick to what I know would, especially because it was contemporary rom-com kind of thing, what we would all be like very, very believable. Not that you have to write contemporaries that way, but that's where I was going. And so when I was able to go, once I was doing writing monster romance, it just allowed my mind to be like, okay, now we have all the possibilities. Now we have all the options. I just have to make it believable that this character would act this way, but it doesn't mean that I have to make it believable a human would act this way.
Right.
And so it was just a lot more freeing. It was a lot more because in Titan, the heroine is a sugar baby. So it allowed me to have conversations around sex work, and for him to have just a very positive view of it from the beginning without the sort of like shackles of societal implications of it. And that was only possible because I was writing monster. If it was, if he was a human man, there would be a different type of conversation. Not that it can end up there, but it just was a lot more freeing to write and to feel like you can go to more extremes with the kink, with, again, with like explaining why he might work that way. It made me think of what, Carmen, you talked about earlier, where you were coming from bodice rippers, which had those extreme elements and would be really like, the heroes in bodice rippers were almost villains because of the extreme elements, that like extreme stuff they did. But in monster romances, their extreme elements are explained away by who they are as monsters. And so they can be sort of internally like still that hero and still have the extreme parts that we like, and have it like balance out really well. I don't know. That's the appeal to me as an author to it and as a reader.
I know that I had read Jane Ann Krentz had done an interview a long time ago when she did her first was the sci-fi. Like she's the one who introduced the sci-fi. And I know, Kate, that you've interviewed her yourself, but that she, once writing it, decided, okay, this is very similar to historicals. And so when we look at that evolution, even before where we could take, because and then even in the early 2000s after Bodice Rippers, we had like really popular time travel. So like we had the paranormal and then we had time travel where we're taking us out of like the constraints of what our society looks like. And now we're like the monsters is that next step, exactly like Jillian's saying, of saying that, okay, well, I don't need her to go back in time to see a guy who doesn't know the rules of today's society. Or I don't need her to fly into space and we have to set this like 2000 years in advance where we change her society. I'm just going to get a monster and introduce her and we can go and do the same kind of things. And so I think those are the fun things that happen in these subgenres where authors get to play with where does a female, like that heroine, especially when we're inserting, what would we wish our partner would be like?
Yeah.
And I would like to not have to explain why this is the one golden unicorn of a man in today's society who actually is doing what I want, which there's some amazing authors and like very great diversity that is happening in like rom-coms and contemporaries right now. But there is some fun that we get to be like, I can make all of these changes and the guy can just be comfortable. Like the hero can be comfortable in himself and he doesn't have to explain why he doesn't prescribe to toxic masculinity and he doesn't do all this stuff. So
yeah. I mean, that was one of the greatest things that I enjoyed writing for Thorn's Dove, and I'm currently for Ruger's Pearl, is being able to take away what we know of as today. And like you said, Carmen, is include the things that we wish our partner would be like and remove that toxic masculinity and be able to explore the kinks and everything else, but in a different context than the way that we currently have to a lot of the time. So, and yeah, just removing the structure system, it gives us so much freedom. And I think that as writers, that's what we really enjoy, is the freedom that we could create a world that and relationships that we wish we either experienced or could see more often in real life. And also for readers, that they get to escape into that and get to explore things. And as authors, as long as we, properly represent things and do it so respectfully, I feel like that gives everybody an opportunity to really explore their sexuality, explore different kinks, and explore different thought processes, but in a safe environment because it's consolidated into a book. And so we're escaping into it.
It's aspirational.
Yeah.
We just got to find some double-dicked monsters out here with horns, I did want to ask, and then we'll wrap up by giving a few more recommendations, even though I think everybody's done an excellent job of just sort of inserting book recs here and there throughout. But it's a two-parter. The first is, do any of you have a favorite kind of monster that you like to read about in romance? And also, on the flip side, is there a monster that you just don't fuck with?
That's a good question.
And honestly, I'll put it to the chat too, because I would love to hear people's responses on this one.
I would probably say the one that I don't fuck with would be centaurs. And I think that was just, I live in California, so there's too many horror stories about donkeys in Tijuana. I think that's why, is I'm like, I don't need that. Thank you. But I do really enjoy, I love orcs. Finley Fen really unlocked that for me.
Yeah. For a lot of people.
But then Nagas too, because it's, as someone who's autistic and has ADHD and stuff, like the idea of being bound, it's like actually soothing and calming. And so,
I like that.
Yeah. So that's something for me that's really appealing. Plus, he's got 2 peens. That's kind of fun.
Yes, always. I personally, mine's not so much a specific monster as it is a monster trope, but I love the Mars needs women trope, where it's just funny. I hate pregnancy in romance novels. I don't want to read a book about a pregnant heroine. Before I got pregnant, and especially, I know some people love them, and that is totally fine. But I did not feel sexy while pregnant, and I So I cannot fathom a world in which a heroine would. Like, I just can't. But I love the breeding trope, so I make no sense. And that's why I love Finley Fen and why I love Dice Planet Barbarians. I love this idea of like our species is about to die out unless we get a human female. They get a human female and they worship the shit out of her. That's what I'm here for. I'm here for like, we are putting this human female and all of her flaws up on a pedestal, and I don't give a shit what she does. I'm going to love her no matter what. Because sometimes I feel like, I feel unlovable sometimes. I feel like, well, I'm being a real bitch today. And I'm like, but here, Bethel doesn't care if Georgie's being rude and stubborn. He still loves her. And I have not yet found a monster I would not have so far. And I just read Seraph by Lily Mayne, which is definitely the most, he has like a bunch of eyes, like a bunch. And they all blink at different times and stuff all over his head. And if that didn't stop me,
yeah, that's a good point.
So I'm still waiting for this is too monstrous for me monster. I haven't found it yet.
I'm the same. I have not. Every book I read, I find out that I have no limits, because Seraph isn't even the most monstrous one I've read, and because I read Earth Fathers Are Weird by Lynn Gala. So she wrote this duology, and Rick, who like Max, who's the human, meets Rick, and he names him Rick because he kind of like sounds like he's burping, like from one of the what's that cartoon, Rick and Morty. So he calls him Rick because he can't pronounce his name, and Rick looks more like an octopus than a human. He prizes symmetry over symmetry. So he likes Max's intestines more than he finds those very sexy because he saw them on like an ultrasound. So he has lots of tentacles. And he has lots of eyes. But he's like the sweetest alien monster in the world. He's like neurotic. He's just, it's such a good book. So Earth Fathers Are Weird.
I'm loving everything you're saying, Carmen, but I'm still mentally checked out at he finds like his intestines sexy.
Yeah,
I know, right? He tells them that they're just beautiful, and Max thinks he's ridiculous. And it's very funny.
Aaron,
I'm trying to think of how that would work. Is that wise? Because he could just, it's like a maze for him.
It's an Impreg one where he.
Oh, that makes sense.
So Max thinks he's getting hired to be a nanny for his kids because there was a lost in translation thing, but he's actually getting hired to be a surrogate. And so he's going for his like appointment at the beginning, and they have to check him out. And Rick gets to notice how like winding his intestines are. So he tells Max it's okay that he's symmetrical on the outside. He's asymmetrical inside, so he's beautiful.
That's new.
Yeah,
that's cute, though.
Oh
my God.
It's one of my favorite books. It is not on KU though, so but it's worth the read. And then I've also read the Tiffany Roberts. They wrote the spider one that Jillian had mentioned. So yeah, I've read Exoskeletons. I've read my Nagas. I've read my double dick dragons and stuff. And I've also read Seraph. And so I have no limits. And so mine would be more along like the trope side that I really like. Where there's like that beast within, like where he has something that's going to get unleashed and he's like always holding on, but when he meets that person, they can calm him, and and so like they're that person that does that. And then I like my Grumpy Sunshine, so
yes,
even you can put that into like my Win and Danny from Lily Mayne, and just like how grumpy the orcs are for Finley Fen. Like I'm gonna love those books forever and ever. So. Yeah, no
Actually,
limits.
I want to change my answer. The Scorpion's Mate by Susan Trombley. He's literally a scorpion. Like he is just a scorpion. That is the monstrous monster I've ever read, and I felt
that was a good one. That was a good one because he was.
I'm gonna change my answer.
What's the monsterest monster you've ever read? I like it, Jillian. We still need yours.
Of what I won't or will read. There's nothing I won't read. I don't have any issues with like spiders or snakes or anything. I think like there's stuff that's like less appealing. Like a naga is less appealing, even though the bound part is appealing. Just because I don't know. I think I'm more personally attracted to something that's hairy and warm.
That's valid.
Yeah.
Valid.
Versus sort of like cold and slippery. Not that you can't make it work, not that I won't read it, but I just think that is like that's where I tend to want to write, and that's where I tend to like if I'm scanning a bookshelf or like KU, I'm like, okay, fur and horns. He seems cuddly.
I love horns. I mean, I really, a part of me hates myself for being really into something so phallic, but I'm just like, yeah, put it out there.
They're handlebars.
Yeah.
I can ride my bike with no handlebars, but why would I want to? If the face is supposed to be a seat, the handlebars are nice.
Yeah, the new grip.
There is a trope that I always look for, which luckily, I mean, I think that's the appeal of monster romance is this happens so much, is I am obsessed when there is one character who is really experienced in something and another character, which is usually the human, who is very inexperienced. And so the more experienced one has to teach the less experienced one, and they have to go slow, and there has to be lots of communication and checking in and prep work and aftercare and just general caretaking. It is like
so hot.
I eat that like, and that's why it's like you can make that work. We talked about I think it's ensnared. Where he makes the dress for her, or there, you know what I mean? Like there's some element of them using their monstrous aspects to do caretaking, to be like, let me provide for you. So anytime that shows up, which luckily is a lot of monster romance,
yes,
trope, I'm happy, which is why I keep reading it and keep writing.
I'm with you. I love that as well. Yeah. And what's interesting is I've usually seen it used in reverse, especially I feel like in the alien romance I've read, where it's more of she as the alien. Human woman. Actually, I have read The Virgin Alien, but that she has to maybe show him how to kiss. He doesn't know like what kissing is. And that to me, I love when, because again, it goes back to this idea of like men being comfortable with like women showing them how to do something or tell them how to do something, or, oh, you're doing this wrong. Like, let me show you how to do it. And it's never done in a negative way. Like these men, you know, are more than willing to learn because they want to please their partner and they want to have this experience with them. So I'm with you. There is something very, very sexy about that.
Well, and you're different species, so there's no shame in that.
Right. No. And there shouldn't be.
Yeah.
I will say, oh, go ahead, Carlotta.
I was just going to say that it's there's a level of acceptance with that.
Yes.
Because they're accepting that the main female character has this knowledge. They're accepting being taught, and with all of it, I love the acceptance and the consent and all of that. I love it. I just eat it up. I'm sorry. I just had to say
No.
I would just.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, when you were saying that that's the only thing that was one of the red flags that used to happen in a lot of like the sci-fi ones. That there's a fine line about like it's okay to be teaching in like the bedroom and like the intimacy things. But one of the things that I used to read a lot more, and I'm happy to see a lot of the authors that are writing now aren't doing it, have that like when the human is coming into a new world and it has that very white savior, like colonial colonizer coming in, and they're going to come in and tell the aliens how their world, the reason why like they're dying out is because they didn't do this, this, and this, rather than just coming in and accepting it. And I'm enjoying that the trend has definitely moved.
Yeah.
The other way, but that's really, when you mentioned that reminded me of some of the ones that I don't like reading. So I guess that would be my no-go for me. It's not what the alien looks like, but what the female is telling the guy that he shouldn't do.
Yeah.
And I was just going to agree with Birdie in the comments, Alicia in the comments. I was going to say that I love Tiffany Roberts' books. I love their books, but I just have not been able to fuck with spiders yet. Like and it's not, I guess it's just because there's something about spiders in real life that I just can't remove myself from. Like and here's the thing is I love the idea of tentacles. Like, I love reading tentacles in monster romance because I'm like, oh, you can use them to like suspend somebody, to restrain somebody. But I don't have the same regard for like spider qualities or like a web. Like, and I know that it's just like a texture difference. Like, I don't, but then on the flip side, I'm with Jillian in that I like a warmer, hairier body because that's the kind of men that I like too. And so I'm like, I don't know what it is about spiders specifically that I just can't wrap my brain around. But I love Tiffany Roberts' books. I don't know what it is. Believe me when I say I've thought about this so in depth. I'm like, okay, it's not multiple arm, legs. Nope, it's not that. It's not necessarily like a hairy body. No, like I just don't know what it is. But it is like the one thing that so far I'm like, I love you, Tiffany, but no, I'm not. I haven't.
Have you tried it? I'm just curious when you say, because I know a lot of people that's like, some people are like snakes are no-go, so they won't read Naga, and it's the same with the spider ones. Is it you haven't picked it up at all? Like you can't get into it, or you read it and you just
picked it up at all. That's the thing. And normally I'm very much somebody who is willing to try like anything, but there's something that's preventing me from even opening the book that I'm like, and you know what? I know in my mind, I'm like, I'll probably love it. I will probably really enjoy it, but I just haven't breached that gap yet.
It is. I find from when I read that one, it's very much you can kind of like, because everything happens in the front, kind of like when you read Centaur ones. Like there's like some Centaur ones, he's in the back, and some are in the front, and it's like they can't make up their mind. Their spiders are very everything's up front. So you kind of just it's like a big butt. And like, so if you're okay with like multiple,
which I like butts.
Yeah, like you kind of picture it as like a big butt because everything's in front. And it's more because like in his body is still pretty warm and like hairy, like that stuff. It's more the exoskeleton on the face, like because they don't have lips, and so that and the multiple eyes up there that make. But they do a lot of bondage in that one. There's like some
which I am all about. I'm like, that's great.
reading.
I will take it. So
wait,
yeah, I don't
Carmen,
know.
What Centaur are you reading where it's the back half?
I sent you this one before. I can't remember. It was not
Wait,
good.
Front half
It was a novella. I'm not going to name names. I was reading it, and there's one scene where she's on a rock, and it was like, okay, because he's kind of like standing up, but there was another scene when they were like in a tent, and he is at some point, he's back there like a horse, and they're being intimate, and he's still able to kiss her face. Like, I don't understand. Like, has he shrunk? Like, is he just a miniature horse? Like, how are we? I don't understand. I don't. She like rides like a horse later to get to like whatever destination.
Some author is watching this and like taking notes. Like,
I'm just picturing like people walking their like tiny ponies down the street now.
I have read a paranormal one where she has her sidekick is a talking miniature unicorn who's like, and he is very promiscuous with women.
Great.
He's a side character, so you don't really find out how he does it, but so it does happen.
The author left it up to everybody's imagination on that one.
There's no limits to the monster romance genre.
No,
absolutely not. And I only see it growing from here and expanding even further from what we already have, which makes me wonder like what's next. And I don't have an answer for it because I am just waiting with anticipation.
4. That's what's next. 4.
Okay.
Where you eat the people. That's the one that we've barely read, and I don't think that would be. That's one I probably don't want.
Give it a month.
There's definitely a crossover. That's a big thing in anime and manga.
Mm-hmm. There you go. It's only a matter of time then. So, but I did just want to ask everybody if you had any other book recommendations that you wanted to make. I know that the one I've actually somebody highlighted this somewhere on social media, but I started reading them this past week. It's a 11 book series, I think, of like interconnected short monster novellas called the Creature Cafe series.
Oh yeah.
I've been reading those and they're very quick, bite-sized. You've got all different kinds of relationships. You've got male, you've got a polyamorous. I mean, there's really so many different matchups. And what I love about them is that they're, again, very quick. You have all different kinds of creatures. And the premise is so cute because it's all about a barista who basically is like a matchmaker and sets up people with monsters in their cafe. And I just thought it was so cute, but then also gets very kinky and very erotic very quickly. So it's kind of the best of both worlds.
I really like Ursa Dax's. It's more like Alien series, but the thing that I love most about it is it's sort of like Tank Girl, means ice planet barbarians on a desert planet.
Sure.
And because they got kangaroo features, which is interesting. And then Kimberly Lemming's books, because they're just like a D&D. They're like side quests. It's fun.
They're so fun. They're so fun. And that's the other thing I'm really also loving is like these cozy monster romances. I feel like as kinky as a lot of them get, and we've talked about this, I love that there are some that are coming out that are not that are definitely like more on like what I would consider like the cozier rom-com side, where it's not necessarily like an alpha monster or you know, they just kind of coexist and people are just treat everybody the same regardless of like what species they are. So that's a good one. And the other one I thought of was the Muscles and Monsters by Ashley Bennett. And the second book in that series comes out soon, and that one has tentacles. So yeah, again, very cozy, very sweet.
Yeah. Like CM Muscasta does the cozy girls weekend.
Yes.
I always recommend their books as like an intro. So I'm like, you want where they're not too, they coexist, like you said, they coexist in the same world. It's very just like gentle in a sense. It's not, there's not a lot like of crazy drama or like we're stuck on an alien planet. It's just like, here's a cozy little community that's monsters and humans. And yeah.
It's adorable.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Low angst, low drama.
Yeah.
Definitely a fun one.
I feel like you guys have we've kind of covered all, like I had a list and I feel like we covered all of them that like I was going to recommend, or they're in the background of Kate's bookshelf. I was going to, Lady of Brooksgrave Manor, and we've talked about the other one, Soul Eater. But I was also thinking Sing Me to Sleep by R.M. Virtues is one of my favorite. The Sleep Paralysis Demon. It is not cozy. So just a heads up, like read your trigger warnings for that one. But I love that because it does essentially she is like paralyzed in her sleep when he like visits her, and so consent happens in a really sort of interesting way because she's not able to physically move when a lot of their kinky activities happen. So it is like quite the opposite of a cozy one, but I very much enjoy it and recommend it to everyone.
I love R.M. Virtue's books in general, so
yeah. I like to plug Vera Valentine if you like absolutely bonkers stuff. The most recent one was Sentient Balloon Animals. Well, they're shifters, but they're like they can turn their member into like a balloon, like kind of during, and it's like funnel cake flavored.
Juice.
Yeah. Evidently, she's coming out with a sequel too.
Yep, because people were so into it.
Sales. Yeah,
it's
so I also like Carnal Cryptids, which was my first book by her. That's like these cryptids feed on fear, and so they need people to believe in them and fear them in order to stay on this planet or in this world. And so it's like there's 3 guys and then a believer. The heroine is a believer, which is like the most powerful human that can believe in you, is somebody who like genuinely believes these things exist. And so they like glom onto her, and it starts off, it's a little dark at first because they have to scare her, but later they are able to work things out. But it's like, it's, what is it? MMMF. So the guys are in a relationship with each other already and bring her into the relationship, which is an interesting dynamic. And Vera lives a BDS, or she explores the BDSM lifestyle. I interviewed her, and so the things are in a lot of her books. There's some kinks and stuff, and she always does her research, and things are very accurate in terms of that and respectful to the lifestyle, which is great. Her stuff's just absolutely bonkers.
Vera's also co-authored a bunch of like really quick, bite-sized novellas. One of which I feel like people got really into last year. That was a Thanksgiving themed one where what if your leftovers came to life and like railed you in the kitchen afterwards. And
I love it.
What I especially appreciate is that at one point I had tweeted something saying that I wanted there to be like a dirty version of A Christmas Carol with Scrooge getting railed by ghosts, and Vera messaged me and said, great, I'll do it. And like within a month, that book was out to read. And so I was like, oh my God, you've literally taken this ridiculous idea and just like manifested it into existence. So I am so appreciative of that. And I think she did an incredible job with it. So yeah, those, and I think they're like 30 pages long. Like they're very, very quick, but it was everything I dreamed of and more.
They got longer though, so that's part of her holiday hedonism series, her and her co-writing partner.
Yeah.
And then she did a shorter one again that was Valentine's Day, which was a menopausal divorced woman being railed in the back of her van by 3 vampires.
Yeah.
Shape-shifted into like gargoyle vampires.
So
and
good.
she does like kinks really well. So there's one hero who doesn't actually like to participate, he just likes to watch.
Yes.
And so he does. And then they have the what is it? Freedom Dragons that just came out, but it was like 500 pages, and I was not expecting it.
I haven't read that one yet.
That one. Everybody knows I love bringing new fetishes into I don't know, making them normalized. And so there's a foot fetish that's handled. She actually spoke to somebody with a foot fetish to make sure that it was going to be handled respectfully, and it is. So
love.
Those books are great.
Love. Carmen, I think you were the last one to maybe share some recs.
I gave a lot throughout, which were like my main ones. I guess the only ones that didn't really come up that would be more on like the bonkers end of things. So like you're really getting into the, like, if you're not reading Vera and you want to read, or you like her and you want to read more, S.J. Sanders is really bonkers because she likes to put a lot of double peens, and it's not just reptiles. Like the Pixies Queen, they have glitter, and that's aphrodisiac of their fluid, and they're doubled, and they're in a 4-male committed relationship, and they need like to breed, like, so they're not non-binary, so they're looking for their mate to be able to breed. And that one's pretty. And she has a series where they look very wolfish. So there's that like red, and there's a few other, they kind of look after like Red Riding Hood. But her wolves don't shift, so they're all hairy all the time. They have like 4 arms, they have 4 eyes, and they have double peens. So she's pretty bonkers. And then one of the ones that I read, it was like, you know, where you fall down those rabbit holes on Kindle Unlimited, and the algorithm just keeps telling you, like, if you read this, you might like this. And so I was reading an author named Joel Abernathy, who's a trans author who writes like queer mafia, but he also writes under L.S. Davis, and it's like polyamorous, impreg. And I got stuck into this series that like right from the beginning. So I'm like reading it. It's called like the Godbearer series, but I decided I just really needed like a palate cleanser of seriousness. And I picked up his, it's called Lightbearer, and he's the delivery driver who, like, his sister gets like made a deal with a demon. And so he goes and tracks down his sister, and he like exchanges his life. And he's just like this really like wise cracking guy who like falls in love with a demon who's going to impregnate him with like his light to like bring it to it's just supposed to be light, and it's supposed to be an army, but he turns out to be like this architect thing. And so he turns it into a bait. It's like so bonkers. It is wonderful. Like you have to read it as bonkers, and then you love it. So those are the type of authors that I feel that didn't really get mentioned that I would recommend.
I love it. Well, clearly, you know, we've had a fair share of recommendations for books and authors during this panel. So hopefully people watching or listening when I release this as a podcast episode will have their pens in hand prepared to add these books to their TBR lists. If you are watching live or revisiting the video on YouTube, you will see that I have links in our video description for all of today's guests. You can check out Kate's podcast. Carmen gives some great recommendations on Instagram. Jillian and Carlotta both have books that are out in the world that you should check out, as well as more to come. And if you are not watching the video, you can listen to the podcast where I will also include the links in today's show notes. So thank you guys so much for tuning in to, listen to all of us talk about monster romance, and to all of the amazing panelists, our monster schmexperts. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Yay. Okay, now everybody go read some monster romance because it's still too hot outside. So it's time for some drinks and monster peen.
Hell yeah.
Okay.